Thanks very much, Chloe, for the kind introduction. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Canadian Research Data Center Network for hosting this virtual event. And I'd like to thank all the audience that are tuning in this afternoon to take their time to allow Statistics Canada to share some of our recent data development that we're very excited about. So let me just try to share my screen now and see. Oh, it says it disabled my sharing function as a participant.
Can you try it now?
Okay. Yes, thank you. All right, let me full screen, and if you could let me know if you can see it, that would be fantastic. Okay, so let's see. Nope, see, you're seeing my slides, right?
We're seeing your slides, yes, and we can see you as well.
Okay, so let's just go from here. All right. My name is Jan-Bro Lee. I'm from the Economic Analysis Division at Statistics Canada. And in today's talk, I'd like to share with you some of our most recent data development on the business research microdata. So a quick roadmap to help guide through our next 40 minutes or so. First of all, the background of business microdata, an overview of business research microdata, and finally, how to access such data. Okay, so when it comes to business microdata, we as Statistics Canada have faced a number of challenges. Identity of units must be protected, and so that no individual or business can be directly or indirectly identified. Unlike social microdata, units in business microdata are readily identifiable even without direct identifiers. The distribution of business data is often highly skewed, and as such, it is difficult to protect the identity of large firms. The sparsity of the data adds additional dimension. Let's think about aerospace industries in Quebec or fertilizer industries in Saskatchewan. With as little information as industry and geography, a small number of large corporations, such as Canadian multinationals, can easily be identified. There are greater financial incentives to identify the particulars of some firms and their competitors. To address these issues and concerns raised by business respondents, certain measures, in addition to the ones that are already in place at the research data centers at Statistics Canada, have already been adopted. SAFE project, for example, similar to RDC's, access is provided only to approved projects focusing on multivariate analysis. And SAFE researchers, again, similar to RDC's, researchers have to become a Statistics Canada deemed employees in order to obtain access. In addition, researchers must declare no conflict of interest. Such an issue is unique because the nature of business microdata that are different. To ensure a safe workplace, business microdata previously are only accessible in the Statistics Canada head offices in Ottawa at the Business Data Access Centre, or BDAC, formerly known as Canadian Centre for Data Development and Economic Research, or CEDAR. So to ensure the data safety, unsophisticated synthetic data are provided to researchers to aid their preparation of programs. Access to business microdata is through an interface where real observations cannot be reviewed. All programs are submitted through this interface that are logged and audited. So this interface where observations cannot be directly reviewed is essentially serves as a extra step to protect the business microdata, the observations are respondents. And finally, to ensure safety of output, a generalized tool developed at Statistics Canada is used to perform the confidentiality checks. This measures on projects, researchers' workplace, data, and output, ensures StatsCan's due diligence is enforced. However, traveling to Ottawa remains a barrier to many researchers living outside the National Capital Region or in other parts of Canada. To improve access to business microdata, two pilot projects were launched in 2018 at Statistics Canada's RDCs across Canada. The first pilot used the T2 Longitudinal Employment Analysis Program, or T2 LEAP. The LEAP portion contained employment payroll first last year of the businesses, industry, and provinces where these businesses operate. T2 portion, on the other hand, contained 14 General Index of Financial Information, or GIFI variables. On the right-hand side, you'll see from the second pilot on the survey, using the survey on financing and growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. They were linked to the administrative data. Survey portion contained information on debt, lease, type and method to acquire financing, characteristics of ownerships, etc. Administrative data portion contained 17 GIFI variables. So these pilot projects were set up following a nationwide call for proposals. Researchers with a proven project conducted their research in the RDCs using the scientific use version, or synthetic, or some call treated data version at the RDCs. They finalized their analysis by submitting their documented and error-free programs to CEDAR analysts, who then ran these programs on confidential microdata. The final results are vetted before released to the researchers by email. Through these two pilots, the experience gained and feedback obtained were expected to help place business microdata in the RDC permanently. And today, I would like to introduce you to the Business Research Microdata, or BRM, an enterprise-level administrative data developed by the Economic Analysis Division at Statistics Canada. Adding to the regular RDC's data holdings, the BRM provides researchers with firm-level variables that have been used by the division in its own research and analysis. This 2017 vintage will cover all incorporated enterprises in Canada that file either a corporate tax return, T2, or a statement of remuneration paid, or T4 slip, or the payroll deduction remittance form, PD7. The period covered is between 2000 and 2017. Industry includes all two-digit North American industry classification system industries, except education, health, public services. The BRM currently consists of 5 components. First, National Accounts Longitudinal Microfile, or NALF. I'm going to introduce a series of acronyms, so hopefully this would provide a bit of background for our next slide. The Business Owner Module from the Canadian Employer-Employee Dynamics Database, or CEED, BOM. Trade by exporter and importer characteristics, TEC and TIC on merchandise trade, so goods and commodities. Scientific research and experimental development, or SHRED expenditures from Schedule 32, Canadian Productivity Program on Capital, Labor, Energy, Material, and Services, so CLAMS. With these 5 fundamental components in mind, we can now build the BRM framework. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the panel, you will see the NALF and CEED business owner module. So these two combined provide businesses information such as finances, performances, productivity, payroll, employment, etc., and business ownership by gender on all private corporations in Canada. On the right side panel, you will see the trade, commodity trade or merchandise trade from TEC and TIC, the SHRED expenditures, R&D expenditures from SHRED, and finally, the industry-specific price deflators from CLAMS. All of these 5 components jointly provide the foundation of our BRM So now you know the source data. You might ask what variables will be provided, will be made available through the RDC access. To avoid going down to the list, which I'll momentarily share some of the specifics, here are some general aspects. The BRM consists of two types of variables. The first one are process or base variables that we refer to base variables, or derived or analytical variables. These variables have been defined in the same ways as in the division's own research work. So the base variables are processed from T2, T4, or PD7, and Statistics Canada's business register. Analytical variables are derived from T2, the SEED BOM, SHRED, TechTick, and CLIMS. The analytical variables are based upon economic series, common usage, and published papers by the Economic Analysis Division. These variables are derived to help lower the information barrier for external researchers outside of Statistics Canada in their projects. They are documented, and the raw versions are present for reproducibility. And more variables will be added over time as new EAD analytical variables become available. For example, EAD is currently in process of assessing how patent data can be linked to the BRM. For instance, the PatStat, the Worldwide Patent Statistic Database. So in summary, the base portion of the variable list contains over 60 Giphy variables, Giphy and BINS register variables. Analytical portion contains over 70 variables, so a total of over 130 firm level variables combined. In contrast to the previous released pilot project of under 20 variables of Giphy variables and BINS register variables each, this has been a substantial improvement. These variables provide key information on firms includes finances, performances, ownership by gender in private corporations, merchandise trade, investment, and R&D expenditures. And hopefully very shortly, we'll also add some patenting invention activities. Okay, in terms of analytical research, the BRM has been used to study employment and business dynamics, productivity growth, trade, firm survival and performances, and related gender-based analysis. We have a list of publications should you be interested. Okay, now finally, I'll touch upon some items on how to access the business research microdata file. So the facial release in the RDCs will be launched in March 2021. So stay tuned. It will be announced by on StatsCan's website. We'll submit applications through the Microdata Access Portal application or MAP. The use of BRM will consider research-oriented project focusing on multivariate analysis only. Approved project will be carried out in RDCs across country afterwards. Researchers will be accessing real data with anonymized business identifiers, very similar to the current access mode, except with real data with no interface as some of the researchers had experienced. The program logs will be subject to monitoring and auditing. Okay, eligibility, similar to other type of project, the principal investigator has to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada. In order to become a deemed employee of Statistics Canada for the duration of the project, all investigators on the project have to undergo the security screening and obtain clearance. They have to present no conflict of interest. They have to provide a letter of acknowledgement from their employer or academic institution, and finally sworn oaths under the Section 6.1 of the Statistics Act. In terms of proposal requirements, there are several components to consider. First of all, justification of the research. So within this section, researchers need to include context to place their research question in, their question of research, and the project contribution to the literature. They also need to include analytical framework and proposed methodology. They need to justify the use of microdata, the business microdata. They need to detail what type of variables will be required for this specific project. And they also can declare the location of RDCs where the data would be preferably accessed. Final section should include expected output. Researchers should be detailing descriptions of statistic summaries and regressional models in accordance with the proposed methodology. So these two sections should have some correspondence in between. Right. To assess the proposal, the Statistics Canada subject matter divisions will be conducting an institutional review to determine the data viability for the proposed research, its relevance and methods to be applied, and whether the research project has demonstrated the need for access to the business research microdata, the BRM. The proposal will be accepted and evaluated on an ongoing basis. As mentioned before, because the file will, after its launch, it will become part of the regular RDC's data holdings. So it will be permanently placed onto RDCs. Okay. Some considerations related to a timeline. So after your initial applications is screened into the MAP system, so the Microdata Access Portal, some other aspect to consider when determining your project schedule. During the institutional review process, subject matter division will be in communication with the researchers to provide data consultation and to identify the data viability. Should proposal revision be required, further delays are to be expected. If conflict of interest is present, there could be further delays until a resolution is reached. That is to say, the application process may take up to 3 months. For the first-time users of the business microdata, working with the business research microdata BRM for the first time could be challenging as well. It may take some time for researchers to get used to the data environment. As such, a 3-month learning curve is to be expected before their research analysis step. Given these considerations, access to the business research microdata file is not recommended for those with limited time frame for their research, such as the master students, right, in the econ program or business program. And the release of the final results will be subject to the confidentiality vetting in the RDCs. They're supported by a vetting committee in the collaboration with subject matter divisions with Statistics Canada. Intermediate output is not permitted. The descriptive statistics are limited to those that support the multivariate analysis. So essentially your regressional models. As such, a longer turnaround time is to be expected than the current existing RDC standards. And vetted results will also be released from the RDC analyst by email. Okay, I think I went a bit fast on the front, but this launch of the business research microdata, or the BRM, is only the beginning of the RDC releases on business microdata. As mentioned earlier, The Economic Analysis Division, where I work, is already in the process of assessing how patent, such as PatStat, can be linked to the BRM. Other business microdata, as such as a core version of Canadian employer-employee dynamics database, is also under development as we speak. So stay tuned. I will stop here, but thank you very much for your attention. For the remaining time, myself, my Yeti colleague, Amelie LaFrance Cook, and my colleagues from the Data Access Division are available for any questions you might have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Beryl, for this very informative presentation. I'm going to read you the questions that came up through the Q&A function. There's a bunch of them. So there's a question from Wanshang Yu. Can we still apply for the T2 LEAP data?
Oh, sure. We can go through them one by one.
Oh.
No worries. Thanks very much for the question. So for the T2, essentially, the BRM is going to be an improved version of T2 Leap. Recall, if you had a chance to use the T2 Leap, there were only about 14 Giphy variables on the firm side, right? That includes the firm finances, assets, that type of thing, in addition to the LEAP portion. So this is a substantial expansion, if you will, of that data set. And in addition, this release of BRM actually consists of business microdata up to 2017. I believe the previous pilot on T2 Leap was only up to 2015 or 14. I think Amelie, correct me if I'm mistaken. So all that is to say, this would be, the BRM would be a much better version of the business microdata. In addition to, of course, you have the direct access to the RDC data center instead of submitting through CEDAR or BDAC now for running your program on the real data, release the results through release your output down to your RDC analyst. So that extra step is entirely removed. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, and then next question is from Bruce Martin. Can you please provide examples of specific variables?
Okay, so just bear with me for a quick second. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see. Okay. In terms of specific variables, let's see if I can open my file. Not too sure why. Okay, just got my screen back. Excuse me. So in terms of the variables, if you think about the NALF portion, maybe I'll still share my screen for that specific part so that we can draw some relevance. Okay. All right, so I hope you can see my screen.
We can't see your screen, Beryl.
Okay, thank you. All right, so
we cannot.
Oh, we cannot. I'm sorry. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, is this okay?
Yep.
All right, I need to stop and maximize my screen. So on the NALF side, right, these are some, for any users who had experience in using NALF, it consists lots of admin source variables. That includes, if you think of balance sheets from an income statement of the corporate tax return, T4 information such as the payroll and PD7 on employment, joined with the T4 employment information. So specifically, let's say, on the finances side, you are expect to experience some of the variables such as liability, shareholder equity, current assets, amortization of tangible assets, intangible assets, on different type of assets such as land, buildings, machinery, equipment. On um, uh, the other side, we have revenues, net income, cost of sales, total cost of sales, profits. So those are standard corporate tax return variables that are processed and calendarized. Of course, from the business register, you will have identifying information such as industry, NICS, right, at the 2-digit level, the type of legal entity. Let's see, we also have some indicators to characterize the enterprises, whether they have multiple establishments, whether they operate across multiple industries and provinces, and the multinational flag, I believe, would be there as well. And it would also include, so those are primarily the base variables that I was referring to earlier, because these are the variables simply being processed and calendarized. But in addition, there will be analytical variables that will include variables such as labor productivity, right? It will include some of the variables that we use typically in economic analysis, such as total gross output, defined as the sum of total revenue and farming total revenue, and value added, defined by net income before tax, before taxes, and capital cost analysis, and T4 payroll. Some other variables such as total assets, total expenses, investment on different type of assets such as building, machinery, equipment, and intangibles. Right? So those are typically the analytical variables on the derived version. Derived variables. Of course, there are other variables on trade, such as the list of export countries, the list of importing countries, country of origins. From the tech side, on the expenditure front for R&D, you would be expecting variables such as whether the R&D expenditures are contracted by outside of the company, they are purchased, or they are by third party or in-house. So this R&D expenditures will be included there. In terms of the industry specific price deflators that will be available at the corresponding next industries on GDP, so the value added measures, on capital services, labor inputs, and gross outputs.
Okay.
I hope that covers the.
I think that's a very
Lancy.
comprehensive list. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of great questions here. I think your talk really generated a lot of interest from researchers. So I'm just going to try to move forward with the other questions. So next question is from Decio, and he says, thanks for this. In the CEEDD BOM data, is there any immigration info?
Oh, absolutely. So thanks very much for the question, first of all. In this particular case, the business ownership module in this release version would only include by gender as showing on this framework, right? So all that is to say, the immigration module is also being built as we speak. And in fact, several studies has already been using this particular module to do analytical research. So that's definitely something that we will be delving into. As I mentioned, the BRM is not a fixed data set. It will be ever growing. So as more analytical variables become available, we will be adding them to future releases.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Majid Zark. Where can we find the list of variables? Are there any email lists that I can be added to so I get notified when new data gets added?
Thanks for the question. So as I mentioned in the in how to access, maybe I'll just go down to that slide. So the official release will be launched in March 2021. Accompanying this launch, data dictionary documentations and variable list will be also published through the CRDCN network. And so that hopefully would allow a more detailed information sharing to the researchers to help draft their research proposals.
Okay, great. And then there's a question, hello, any plan to include ownership by immigration in the near future?
So I think it's a similar question with the previous one, right? The migration certainly is an aspect in terms of business owner module, and it is currently being developed. A similar version or a subsets version had already been used in other analytical research in my division. So as a result, I think this is definitely down in the future planning.
Okay. Will this data be linked to the LFS?
So labor force survey being, I should first of all say that the BRM is a standalone data file, whether it will be, utilizing a more linkable file environment with across RDC environment. This is a decision that we will have to examine and to see. So at this moment, I can only say that for now, BRM is standalone, and the possibility could be there to link to LFS, but as of now, there is no such a plan.
Okay, good to know. And will international PhD students be allowed to submit project applications?
Fantastic. Actually, I saw it was from Audra. Thanks very much for the question, Audra. Absolutely. So as I mentioned, eligibility wise for researchers, it only requires, let's go there, only requires the principal investigators to be the Canadian citizen. What that means is that if the student has a supervisor, right, so they can jointly, supervisor who is or on the supervising committee, and there is a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada on this project, the group can access, and certainly the PhD student on the research team will be able to access such a data set with approval of the research proposal.
Okay, great. And another question from Desio, if we have access to the RDC already, do we need to redo security?
I think this question in joined with the next question on the asset phrasing agreement. So perhaps, I don't know if my data access division colleagues are here. Would you like to respond to these questions?
Can you tell me the names, because I may have to give them permission.
Oh, I see. I think Eve Emmanuel or Joanna.
Okay.
Joanna Jacobs.
Joanna Jacobs. Okay, I'm gonna look them up and see if I can give them permission here. So
I see. Maybe in the meantime, I'll run down the list of other questions, but we'll circle back on those ones.
So Joanna, you can unmute yourself if you like.
Okay. Hi. Yes. Thank you. So I think the question was, if you already have a current security clearance, do you need to redo it? And that answer should be no, as long as you have a valid project and you have a valid security clearance. You will, however, need to go through the conflict of interest process, which is new for business data. So you may not have been through that yet. So that will be a new process.
Okay, great. Moving on to, are there any longitudinal flags in the BRM? If so, which ones are used, or are the researchers ultimately responsible to develop their own longitudinal framework?
Okay, so on the BRM, there will be the enterprise ID, right? So that will allow you to essentially identify the longitudinality of the units of enterprises. That is, the researchers does not need to be developing their own framework for longitudinality purposes.
Okay, great. What information regarding employees is available in a data set?
So for this data set at the moment, we're only focusing on the business side, and that is the specific research, the specific data on employees will be limited, aside from the T4 slips that allows us to identify the total payrolls generated at the firm level and the number of employees measured by the T4 slips. Right. As I mentioned, the Canadian employee dynamics database, at least a core version of that, is currently under development. And there you will have more information on the employee side, which would include some demographic information such as age, gender, etc. So I would say for now, the BRM does not contain much of individual information.
Okay. And another question, will the data set be updated yearly?
So yes, this file will be released on an annual basis. The specific time as of yet, we have yet to determine, but it's definitely in our plan to release on an annual basis as more recent administrative data become available for analytical use.
Okay. And does the sample include for-profit and non-profit corporations? And is the sample representative for these two populations?
That is a good question, actually. So certainly we include all the private corporations those are included already in the data set. As of nonprofits, I will have to get back to you on that. In terms of representativeness of the two populations, because this database is built upon administrative data, so it covers the entire population instead of a survey. So this is a true business universe, if you will, in the private sector of the business, the private corporations in the business sector.
Okay, sounds good. The next question from Desio, I think you've already answered earlier. So the next question is, do the data files, or will they be including the human resource management related variables for the businesses? For example, recruitment and selection, compensation, education levels, training and development, performance, management practices, variables similar to those that are found in the WES.
So the WES, the Workplace Employee Survey, has been retired. I think it covered 1999 to 2006. Many variables that are related to management practices are not standard, unfortunately, not standard administrative data type of variables, right? So that said, certainly we're looking into other development in terms of linking the files to so this again is touching upon the core version of SEED that we're currently developing. There is a possibility to look into how to link the information, the administrative data base data set to census, right? And that will then allow us to back out some of the information such as education level, such as the training, existing training experiences. So as of now, I say for the BRM portion at the moment or in the next year or two, this aspect is will be limited in terms of management practices and human resource management.
Okay, that's good to know. Will additional vetted results be allowed to accommodate revisions for publication in journals?
Perhaps Joanna would be able to take this question.
Joanna, you can unmute if you're muted.
My apologies, I was muted in two places. All right, so that's a really good question. As Beryl mentioned, no interim output will be permitted. However, the vetting is planned to take place by committee, and we will consult with subject matter when necessary for vetting questions. So if there's good justification for it, I think that it's something that we will consider, but it might be a case-by-case basis.
Okay, sounds good. And then there's another question. Can you explain why the data only goes back to 2000?
In terms of data, because the BINS microdata files are typically built upon the CRA data, which only made available since and the BINS register, since the BINS register was only available after 2000, and this is why we typically have the BINS microdata built after 2000. There are some admin data that build, say, for instance, T2Leap that are there. However, the files are much less harmonized to the newer system, and so the longitudinality will need to be examined. For now, the BRM would only go back to 2000, similar to many other BINS microdata files.
Okay, sounds good. You may have answered the next question in your presentation. How long will it take for vetting results?
I think this, I saw the question on vetting. I see the question on the cost of access. Perhaps Joanna could take up on these two questions too.
Well, I can address the vetting. So our typical turnaround time is 3 to 5 business days. That being said, this will be done by committee, and it is a new thing for us. So I would expect that we'll be able to maintain our usual standards, but we will communicate with you should there be any difficulties with that. I'm sorry, Beryl, I didn't hear the second question.
The second question relates to the cost of access.
Oh, I'm not the best person to answer that question. That might be one we need to follow up on.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. And just so you know, I believe we have Mustafa Arnak on the line as well from the data development team, if that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a plan that so far the access through RDCs will be free of charge because they are accessed to by the academic community. But please do jump in.
I'm just going to promote both Mustafa. I'm going to promote Mustafa right now to a panelist, just in case he has anything to say about this.
Maybe while waiting, I'll take on the next question on the household data. As I mentioned earlier, this launch is focusing on the BINS microdata. So the household data are typically related to social side. So I will leave that to our other subject matter. I don't think it is quite our focus here today.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't read this question out to you, but okay, so maybe we can move on to the data dictionary questions. So is the data dictionary of the BRM available on the StatCan website?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, during the launch in March 1st, along with the launch will accompany data dictionary, the user guide effectively, and the variable list. All will be made available through CRDSN website.
I'm sorry, I'm just noticing now that Kelly Cranswick has her hand raised. I'm just
yes, please, Kelly, join the party.
Yeah, I'm just going to promote her here to speak. 1 second. Kelly. Sorry, Kelly, I just saw your hand. Okay, you can unmute whenever you like.
Mute. Okay, hi everyone. I just wanted to go back to the question about fees. So we'll now be treating business data just like any other data set coming into the RDCs. So if your project is, you know, a typical academic project, there would be no cost. If, you know, it's a fee for service project, then there would be cost, but that isn't based on the fact that it's business data. So I hope that answers. So generally, if you're an academic project, there would be no fees.
Okay, great. So moving on to the next question. Thanks for your presentation. Will it be possible to obtain data for the 3 territories?
Kelly?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Will it be possible to obtain data for the 3 territories?
I think Beryl already answered the question. This is not a sample. It's a population data. It's like all enterprises are included. So it's not going to select from just provinces or certain like enterprises or whatnot. It's just whatever is in Canada, it's going to be there.
Excuse me, you're absolutely right. I misread the question. I thought it was asking about how to obtain the data. In terms of accessing. Absolutely, all the data, because the data set is essentially a universe, business universe of in Canada, right, based upon administrative data. So it will cover everyone in the private sector, in the all private corporations in the business sector. That includes those 3 territories.
Okay, sounds good. And will the NIICS codes be available at the 3-digit level, especially in the manufacturing sector? That would be extremely important. That's one of the questions.
Right. So unfortunately, the NICS classification are only available at 2-digit level. And this decision was made based upon the confidentiality concerns related to business microdata use. So for researchers who are familiar with RDC files such as LAD and Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank and LWF, the Longitudinal Worker File, they also are available through RDCs. Both are essentially a sample, right? A individual level data file that includes respectively 20 and 10%, I believe, of the Canadian population. They have very limited information on the employer side. I think so. This, in comparison, right, to with our BRM, contains 100% of all corporations in the business sector in Canada, and the published consent tables only uses firm level, using the firm level file, are typically produced at a 2-digit, and this was essentially our decision to alleviate the sensitivity trigger that can lead to you know, confidentiality concern related to the final release, and as such only 2-digit NICS information will be made available on this release.
Okay, so we still have just under 10 minutes left, and so that's plenty of time, hopefully, for the rest of the questions. Mustafa, did you have anything to say?
Not I mean, I think Kelly covered that cost question, so that was what I was going to comment on. Joanna mentioned, I think the for the vetting that can be facilitated within the same time frame, but I think Beryl mentioned this during her presentation. She already covered that, saying that like the vetting might take longer. So everything like access, the evaluation of your proposals and the time frame for getting the access for data and your vetting will be a little bit different than our other data sets. So it may take, those things might take longer. So just to keep in mind, but all of those points are in the Beryl's presentation. Maybe the person who asked that question kind of missed, but if they go back to the slides, like everything is there. They will take longer than usual.
Okay, sounds good. So the next two questions, I believe, Beryl, were already asked, and I think you answered them already. The question after that, when are the CEEDD core data expected to be released to the RDC?
So we're currently working on the development of it. Our aimed timeline would be sometime next fiscal. Of course, to essentially place any files, social or business, down to RDCs, there's a series of a process we have to go through to ensure the integrity of the data and the ease of accessibility to the RDC researchers, such as documentations and variable lists that will be accompanied on each of these launches. So with those considerations, we will likely, have another webinar prepared for the seed launch as well. So stay tuned.
Okay, sounds good. And would there be any contact person to answer any questions regarding the feasibility of a proposed research project?
Great question. And these are the type of information will be released on the official release. So this release will include aspect how to submit your proposal, who to contact in terms of identifying the data viability of your proposal. Those type of information will be made available.
Okay, great. Will there be metadata and documentation on data available to researchers before the project application to determine if their projects are worth moving forward?
So I would say first of all, the documentation's variable list user guide will be released to accompany the official launch in March 2021. Just want to reiterate that since everyone is very enthusiastic about this launch. In terms of whether their project can move forward, usually researchers can draft their proposals, right? Utilizing the resources such as user guide, the variable list, to craft their research questions, and that proposal will be evaluated. And this was what I referred to earlier on the proposal requirement. So following these requirements, your proposal then will be evaluated by Statistics Canada institutional review, which will then examine the data viability of your proposed research. So all that is to say, yes, before going forth, your project will be determined whether your research questions can be answered using our data.
Okay, sounds good. The next question from Charles Plant. I believe what he's trying to ask is, have there been any changes made to the data in order to make them available in the RDCs in terms of sensitivity or in terms of blind spots of information, as he called it?
Maybe I'll just do a quick comparison. In terms of the previous data access, business microdata access down to RDC, the two pilots that were released in 2018, the researchers basically have to submit their program. The files that they have access to on the RDC are synthetic files, right? They are used to train their program so that an error-free code can be sent then to the CEDAR at the headquarters to run them on the real confidential data, and the results will be then returned, communicated through the RDC analyst down to their researchers project folder. Now, the entire this process has been removed because the file itself will be available. The real data will be available down to RDCs with synthetic IDs placed on RDC, so researchers can run their programs directly on the real data to obtain the results. The final results will be vetted by RDC analysts joined with the StatsCan vetting confidentiality vetting committee to determine the essentially sensitivity of this results before its final release. So the major change is that hurdle of communicating through RDC, not being able to see the real data themselves, and the further delay in transmitting this steps, right, or messages. So hopefully, by placing the BRM down to the RDCs, the researchers will have direct access that will, first of all, remove the travel barrier, right? The access barrier previously only accessible at Ottawa in the headquarters of Statistics Canada. And two, instead of working through an interface, whether it's through RDC analysts or through a batch summit system, they would now will soon have direct access to business microdata.
Sounds good. Just in the interest of time, I think we only have time to answer probably one last question. Does this BRM include professions that are incorporated, such as lawyers, dentists, doctors, etc.?
So as I mentioned earlier, because the source data coming from T2, T4, and PD7, which means that if the unincorporated businesses, say for instance, the doctors are for some reason unincorporated, but also do not have any employment, they will not be included in this database. But if they are incorporated, yes, they will be.
Okay, and I believe that's all the time we have right now. Thank you everybody for coming here. Thank you, and thank you for all your questions. And I'm very sorry we are not able to answer all of them just for the interest of time. But feel free to continue the conversation on Twitter with using the handle @CRDCN. Beryl, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to all of your Statistics Canada colleagues. This was a very interesting presentation, and we hope to see you soon in the future events as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.